Hey everybody, we're back here live in Missouri today, and we're going to talk today about maintenance on our machine. So, and maybe talk about just a little bit about the maintenance checklist and some things that we need to look for. So, this was a surprise for me. Like I said, I didn't think that we were going to do this today. It was supposed to go someplace else, and it came back to Missouri today. So we're just going to hang around for a couple seconds here and let people hop on, and we'll just say hi to some people. Hi, Leanne. Kathy Schweigel's there. I hope I pronounced that right. And maybe what we'll talk about when we get started is just some general things that we can do for our machine to keep it wiped down. And then there was a couple weeks ago when we were here, there was a request for like a checklist on some things that we need to do. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit too. Hi, Holly. So I'm going to flip my camera around, and there should be a place that we can do that. There we go. And we'll be back on the machine. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some things that we can do, say on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, and just some things that we can do to take care of our machine. So some of this stuff is from our class from last year, our Quilting with Confidence class last year, and so we'll just kind of go over that a little bit. So cleaning your machine daily, we want to clean the bobbin area at every bobbin change. This is important. This is good for our race, for our bobbin case area and our race. At every bobbin change, when we change our bobbin, we want to go in, clean this area up, and give it a little drop of oil. That'll keep everything running as smoothly as we can possibly keep it running. Don't forget to check inside your bobbin case for lint at every bobbin change, and check around the anti-backlash spring too in your bobbin case. And I'm looking for a bobbin case here in our studio. So we want to make sure on the inside that we do check for lint underneath the fingers. So this is the Toa bobbin case. It has a little different anti-backlash spring in it, but underneath these fingers inside this spring, we always want to kind of keep this all cleaned up. Take a soft brush, keep it cleaned out, and brush your bobbin case out, keep everything in good working order. So we want to clean the tracks and wheels and the tabletop and make sure we don't have any scraps of thread, and keep everything, pretty well all cleaned up. And so what we use is these Clorox wipes. The Clorox wipes here are just seem like they're one of the best products to do this. And we go in with the Clorox wipes and we can just wipe it down like that. These are kind of wet, but they'll be fine. So we go in and we clean our tracks down. We're going to go back around the machine here, wipe down the inside of our tracks. We want to take a special care. We want to look at our wheels. I gotta find my camera here. We always want to take care of our wheels, make sure that they're good and clean. These wipes are a little bit too wet. So we roll the machine just a little bit and wipe down the wheels. Try and get all the lint so that everything is running as smooth as it possibly can. Another thing that we can do, clean down our back tracks, make sure that there's no thread in any of our tracks here. and just keep everything cleaned up. Wipe off the inside of underneath the inside of our machine. Back up underneath the belly here. Make sure there's no oil in here. There's always, you know, a certain amount of oil underneath the machine. We certainly don't want to get oil on our quilt. And also we want to replace our needle at every quilt change, you know, so more or less depending on, you know, the size of the quilt and the fabrics. We want to wipe down our machine's exterior every week. Clean the tracks, like I said, every week with the Clorox wipes. We want to check the encoder wheels, and we'll go back around the back of the machine and talk about that. So our encoders back here, we want to make sure that these wheels are nice and clean. So on the Statler, generally their biggest function is to drive the machine while we're basting. So on the Statler, like this machine, we have a encoder right here. We wipe down these wheels. Now, if you have a Vision or, you know, like a hand-guided machine, these encoders are going to be doing our regulated stitching for us. They're going to be regulating our stitching for us. So we do want to absolutely make sure that these are clean all the time. On the Statler, we have another back underneath here in the back of the machine. We have another encoder wheel back in here, and we want to get back in there and make sure that it's kept clean too. So a lot of times, there's a lot of Statler owners that didn't even know that there is an encoder back here in the back underneath our machine. So keep an eye on that. It runs down the inside of this back rail. Nancy Garner's here. Hi, Nancy. So, and we want to watch our encoder rings for cracks, you know, inspect the U channel, like we talked about the other day when we were here. We always want to inspect the U channel in our check spring right here. And get the camera to focus in on it. This little U channel in our check spring can get worn in the center of the U channel, so we want to make sure that that's in good shape all the time. We want to remove our needle plate and clean underneath it, and we can probably, I'm not sure that I can do that real quick. Maybe we will just real quick. I'll grab a screwdriver. That'd be something that we can do today. Give you another virtual tour of our studio here. So I like, when we remove the needle plate on our machine, I like to use a long screwdriver. This is like a 16-inch screwdriver, but you're able to get it into this needle plate really quick. And we'll pull this off, and hopefully I won't be embarrassed by what we find underneath here. So we take these 4 screws out of our needle plate, and this is probably something that we need to do, say, quarterly if we use our machine a lot. Janelle Borg says, is it okay to blow the bobbin area out with an air compressor? Yes. We can certainly blow this the bobbin area out with an air compressor. Probably the better thing would be like canned air or something like that. This area in here, I caution you, I wouldn't like take an air compressor and blow an old faff or something like that out with an air compressor or canned air and blow that lint up inside your nice old sewing machine. But these Gamble machines have this solid back here, and everything is pretty much walled off. So if you blow this area out with air, there's no place for that lint to go on these machines except for out. So the short answer is yes. You kind of have to watch air compressors. Sometimes if they take in outside air or air from the outside, you can get condensation and blow wet air into your machine. That's never good, but with canned air or compressed air or something like that, it's certainly fine. Why the wipes? Is bleach a good degreaser or what? Yeah, there's no bleach in, there is bleach in here. Yes, there is bleach in here. No, the wipes just seem to break up the oil good. The Clorox wipes do a real good job. If you don't have Clorox wipes, alcohol on a rag is good too. It just cleans up the oil, and if you have the oil cleaned off of the tracks, then they don't attract as much lint. So the more oil and oily substances we can keep cleaned up, the better off we are. All right, so we're going to pull off this plate and see what we have going in here. So this one's not too bad. Jan keeps this machine pretty well cleaned up. She uses it almost every day. And you can see that in here there is some lint, some buildup. Now, when we're on, like when we're out on tour and we have those machines out there every day and we have that black Hobbs batting that we're using, this area can get pretty loaded up with lint. You can see that back down, I'll try and get in there. It's not excessively bad, but there is lint and stuff in the back in here that we could clean out. I'm going to roll that over a little bit. But this machine's not too bad. So say quarterly, we need to get in here and clean this up, especially back up here underneath this needle plate. That lint will build up back in here, and we can get that cleaned out. What else can we talk about? Inspect the belt pulleys for thread and lint. We want to do that on a quarterly basis. And I know Larry Culberson did this the other day, but inside of our belts back in here, we need to quarterly get back up in here, clean that out, and just inspect it. We'll come back down here and look. Try and get a light up in here and look as far back down if you have a Statler or an Elevate, and just see make sure that that's clean. And you can kind of see that cog pulley back in there. Make sure that there's not a bunch of lint built up in there as well. So annually, I would say Andrew talks about doing the floss test. That's the floss test on these thread guides. What'll happen sometimes is if you use your machine a lot, these thread guides will get wore, and probably not these ones up here at the top so much. But when we start getting back down here to these thread guides where it starts making this sharp turn right down here and this last thread guide, they can get worn and they can get sharp, and sometimes you'll get some unexplained thread breaks. So at least once a year, take your thread, I'm going to try and do this and keep the camera on it, and floss it over these last thread guides like this, and see if it's nice and smooth, or if that thread guide cuts your thread. If that thread guide cuts your thread, it's very possible that the underside of this thread guide is worn and it's sharp, and you may need to replace it. That's a pretty easy fix. You know, there's just one screw right here, and and you can get it back, you know, you can get it fixed back up pretty quick. Change our rotary check spring assembly or rebuild it with a new spring and a new felt washers. That's this rotary check spring right here. We talked about that a little bit the other day. There are some little felt washers back in here. If we open that up, you can see it's back in there. It's white. And that's just a little felt washer in there, and that just gives this rotary thread guide, this wheel right here, something nice and smooth to ride on. There's another one in front of this chrome washer. I'm going to try and get it focused a little bit better. There's another one right there. And they do wear out. They get icky after a while. They start turning black, and they're just not soft and fuzzy. And we need to keep those nice and smooth. This cone spring in here usually lasts a long, long time. But like we talked about the other day, this check spring eventually is just doesn't last forever. You know, this is a part that has a predictable life, and the spring is exercised every time we take a stitch. So it's making thousands and thousands of little springs there. So it's just not going to last forever. And with the thread riding over it, it will wear a groove in this little spring. So we want to keep an eye on that. Annually, we might want to take the belt covers off and inspect our belt pulleys. Like on our Statler and our Elevate, maybe take this cover completely off so that we can really actually see back in there and make sure that there's nothing back in there. And check your mechanical adjustments if you're experiencing problems. And there's all kinds of videos online for adjusting your machine if you're having problems with your machine. Mechanical adjustments meaning like checking your needle bar height, your timing of your machine, your hopper foot height, and that kind of stuff. If you're not having any problems with your machine, I wouldn't kick a sleeping dog. I would just leave well enough alone. If your machine is stitching good, then it's stitching good, because some of these adjustments can be a little bit tricky. And definitely before you make any adjustments, definitely go through and watch the videos on how to do it properly. So maybe we'll talk about some things to keep on hands for emergency. This rotary check spring assembly, this whole assembly right here comes out. It's about $30 for this whole assembly. That's a really, really handy piece of maintenance equipment to keep on hand. You get, for your $30, you get the whole assembly that plugs right into this bushing right here. And so you can have it all set up and ready to go. If your check spring fails, then you can just take a little 1/16 Allen wrench, pull this whole assembly out, and put a new one back in, kind of set its rotation a little bit, and you'd be good to go again. It's always good to have some thread guides. Keep some extra thread guides on handy. This needle set screw, if you don't have any extras of this right here, this little screw, you need to have a couple of those on hand. If you lose this little screw, you're not going to find it at Home Depot. It's a little metric short. It's an odd size. It's an odd thread size. And you're just not going to go out to the hardware store and find a replacement. So if you should happen to lose that little screw, or you strip it out or something, then you're not going to be stitching. So that's a very inexpensive little part that you need to keep a couple on hand for. Just get a hold of your area dealer for that. Some extra Encoder O-Rings. the O-rings on your encoder, they do get old, they get dry, and they get cracked. I'll take that one off. So take those off every once in a while. Get those cleaned up. Make sure that there's no cracks in them. Make sure that they're nice and smooth, and they need to be soft, pretty soft and rubbery. You know, we want them to kind of grip the track as they're going back down. They need to kind of grip the track. So definitely keep a couple of encoder O-rings. Here again, that's another inexpensive part that you can just keep around. So maybe an O-ring for your bobbin winder. I believe that's a different size O-ring on our bobbin winders. They are a little bit different. That's another handy little O-ring to keep around. And I can feel this one. This O-ring that came off of that encoder is nice and soft. This bobbin winder is about 6 years old, and now that I'm just doing this video today and I'm feeling this O-ring, it's hard. It's getting dry, it's pretty hard, and it's probably just not gripping the wheel here quite as well as it could. So that's something I need to look at too as well. You always try and have an extra bobbin case on hand. If you drop your bobbin case and you bend it too badly, they're really, really hard to get straightened back out. I'm looking for a bobbin case and I can't find one. Oh, here it is. So what happens with our bobbin case is a lot of times if we drop them, this area right up here on top will get bent in a little bit, and while we can bend that little arm back, it is kind of delicate and it's hard to get back in, get this all straightened back up. So it's always good to have more than one bobbin case. When you buy a replacement bobbin case, you will get this Toa the Toa brand bobbin case as opposed to the original Seiko bobbin case. And that is, I like this bobbin case just a little bit better than the original one. Not that I think the quality is just as good, maybe even better, but I like this anti-backlash spring in this bobbin case. I like the way it's configured. Rather than having the original kind of football-shaped anti-backlash spring in here, this bobbin case has two little arms that just kind of stick up on the sides right here, and it seems to collect far less lint than the original Seiko bobbin case does. So this is a pretty nice bobbin case. I like using this. I use both of them though. We have 2 or 3 of them, and I use them simultaneously without any problem with either one. But this one is my favorite, just for the reason that it doesn't seem to collect quite as much lint. And then our motor belt back out here, and I would pull this off if I had the Allen wrenches and the time real quick. But on our machines, about every once in a while, every 2 or 3 years, we probably ought to check this belt on our machine. If your belt has been running for 5 years back here on the Z motor belt, this is the Z axis on a sewing machine. The Z axis is the needle position. So they refer to this as the Z motor and the belt back here as the Z motor belt. So if your machine has been running for over 5 years, you can take these 2 screws back out of your back cover, pull this cover off, and your Z motor belt will be right behind here. And you can just take and roll that belt off roll a new belt back on, put this clean everything up, clean them up with your Clorox wipes, and wipe this off, and you should be back in business. 2 screws, put your cover back on, and you'll be back in business. Some old retrofits, you might have something else mounted back up here that you have to take off before you get to these 2 screws. But the Z motor belt right back up in here is a pretty easy replacement, and we always want to keep a good motor belt on here, a good Z motor belt. The reason being is this motor does everything for our machine. It tells our machine when to take a stitch, when to stop. It controls the speed. It controls everything in our stitcher, everything our stitcher is doing down here. So we have to have that positive relationship between this motor and the stitcher. And the only thing between the motor and the stitcher is this belt back in here. So that's a $13, $14 part, I think, and it's a pretty handy piece of maintenance equipment part to keep around. Let's see, what else can we talk about? So the top replacement parts, every 1 to 5 years, we should check our anti-backlash spring or bobbin case. We can rebuild our bobbin case, put a new anti-backlash spring in our bobbin case. Our check spring assembly, like I said, if our motor belt Z motor belt is over 5 years old, we should probably replace that Z motor belt. Like I said, it's an inexpensive part. Clean everything up, roll a new belt on there. You shouldn't have to make any adjustments or adjust the motor. Just roll that motor belt on there and you're good to go. Wheel kits. I'm going to lift up on the front of this machine. We need to take our wheels and spin our wheels. Lift up on your machine and spin your wheels and make sure that they spin nice and smooth. I'm going to have a hard time holding the camera and spinning the wheels on my machine at the same time. So take your machine, take them up and spin your wheels and just see how they feel. They should be nice and smooth. They should spin nice and smooth. Of course, they should be nice and clean all the time. If it sounds like an old roller skate wheel or something like that, it's probably time for some new wheels. So these wheels are kind of like the tires on your car. They don't last forever. They start wearing out and they'll start getting sloppy and it'll reflect back into your stitching. So definitely check your wheels, but see how they feel when you turn them. See how they sound when you spin them. A lot of times 2 or 3 of them will be good, and then you'll find one that is in pretty bad shape. So that's something that can make a huge difference. And like the tires on your car, you put new wheels on your stitcher, it's amazing how much better it starts stitching. You don't realize how bad it is until you put a new set of tires on it. So we're going to look at this, and I'm going to go through some questions and see if I can find any news about the quick change feet. The quick change feet hopefully are getting very close. They're still on back order right now, and we ask that you sign up for the newsletter and keep us and like us on Facebook. Follow Gamble Quilting on Facebook, and we'll let you know the moment that the quick change feet come out. Can we get individual breeze track wheels from our dealer? Absolutely. Absolutely. I heard there was a new digital bobbin winder coming out. Do you have any information about that? I do not. So if the check spring came off, do I replace the whole gadget? It probably broke. I'm going to say it probably broke. You can just replace this check spring. There's a great video online about replacing and rechecking your check spring and how to take this assembly out, rebuild it, and put it back together and properly adjust it when you put it back in. But you can just buy this individual spring. While I had it apart, I would put new felt washers in there, just clean it up and put it back together. Somebody says, what size are the felt pads? I'm not sure that they come in a size. I think they're like $1 each, and you can just get them from your dealer. What is the drop the belts? What is the drop the belts before retightening? I'm not sure. How often do you remove the cover for the motor belt? Definitely every 5 years. Definitely once every 5 years, or if your machine is over 5 years, look at the Z motor belt back there and make sure everything's cleaned up. And if that motor belt hasn't been changed in 5 years, I would replace it. That belt needs to be kind of new and rubbery and they're kind of just sticky by nature. So even if it's 5 years old and you haven't stitched that much, it's also good to go ahead and change this motor belt back here because it'll grip so much better. Let's go through. I'm looking for some more questions. I'll go to the bottom. How come you're not using all the holes in the threader? It looks like you're going down and just one up in the last hole. So right here, it depends on this 3-hole thread guide right here. It depends on what we're doing. It kind of depends on the thread too, exactly how the thread is acting. So what we do in our shop is we set our Toa Gauge to set our bobbin tension the same all the time. So we'll set our bobbin tension right around 170, which is just a little bit light on our bobbin case. And so our bobbin tension is the same all the time. However, the top thread is going to act a little bit differently. So as we come down our thread path, our thread comes up, it goes through this thread lead right here, it goes through this post, it goes through our intermittent tension disc, around our thread brake sensor, goes through these holes, and our intermittent tension disc, where we adjust all our tension, this only controls about 15, 20, 25% of our tension right here. So sometimes with some threads, we're going to need more or less tension. And if I need more tension, I'll use all 3 of these holes to get just a little bit more tension to get the stitching to where I want it. I look at it like each thread is different. Jan's got some glide on here right now, so it acts completely differently than, say, this Omni back here. It just goes through the machine a little bit differently. So I just kind of use this like a gearbox. If I need more tension, I'll pick up another hole. If I need less tension than what I've got going, I will use maybe just one hole. And it kind of depends on your machine too. Each machine's just a little bit different. Each machine has different things that they like. This machine likes the bobbin tension very light, and it stitches real well with real light bobbin tension. And other machines are just not like that. They like more tension on the bottom, and it's just It's just the nature of the machine. I know we have a machine in the studio that stitches much heavier than this machine. They both stitch beautifully, but they're two different machines. So any tips on leaders? I guess we're talking about the leaders on our machines. First tip that we've encountered in the last couple of weeks again is do not wash these. If you wash the leaders, you'll pretty much effectively just ruin them. They don't seem to stay straight if you wash them. So this one has the zip-on leaders, but whether you have the zip-on leaders or not, definitely don't wash them. Just try and keep them as clean as you can and take good care of your leaders, and eventually you may have to replace them. They do get stretched. There is some videos online on how to repair them, how to take the zipper out and re-straighten them and re-sew your zipper back on, but probably your best bet would just be to purchase a set of leaders. And I know Andrew has a nice video online on how to replace your leaders. It's really not that big a deal. Sooner or later, they are going to get stretched out, of course, in the middle, and you're going to have to either repair them or replace them sooner or later. Leanne Lively says you're going to have to put that machine back together before Jan gets home. That's true. That's true. My question on belts, how much of a drop is there over time before we retighten them? On the belts, on your Statlers, these belts, now this is a pretty big machine. These Statler belts are pretty loose, and I usually just kind of put these on by feel, not really over tighten them, but they do have some bounce in them. They're not just super tight. If you're an Elevate owner, there is a specific torque that you put on this belt, and it's a different belt. The Elevate uses a different belt than the Statler does, so it operates just a little bit differently. I like the system on the Elevate. It's very accurate. It's pretty cool. All right, I'm going to look through. Is there a new Toa Gauge? Linda's Electric Quilter sold it. Please check with them. I'm not sure that there is a newer Toa Gauge out right now, and it's an electronic Toa Gauge. Let me see if I can find our Toa Gauge. It should be handy right here. Here's the thing about the Toa Gauge, and what I like about it, about using the Toa Gauge. Definitely contact your dealer and get a Toa Gauge and learn how to use it. Like I said, when we're setting up a quilt and we're setting up our bobbin, we'll have our Toa set about 170. When we put a bobbin in here, we want it to pull about 170. And the other thing we don't want to see when we're checking our bobbin case is when we're pulling the thread out through our Toa Gauge, we don't want to see this bouncing needle. We don't want to see this Toa Gauge bouncing up and down like this as we're testing our thread. That's indicative of a problem of some sort, and it could be a damaged bobbin case. It could be a damaged bobbin. This Toa Gauge is one of the ways that we can really alleviate a lot of problems before we ever start. We'll know we have a good bobbin set at the right tension before we take off. Now, with the new Toa Gauge, the electronic Toa Gauge, it has a digital readout in it, and it's going to just digitally read out 170, say. However, if you have a problem with your bobbin and in the analog gauge, like this gauge, it's bobbing like this, you're not going to see that with the electronic Toa gauge. The Toa gauge is going to take the average of this and just give you a number. So not only is it not going to tell you what your actual tension is on that bobbin, but it's also going to lie to you and not tell you that there's a problem. So I would stick with the analog gauge for the long armor. Definitely stick with this analog gauge. It's cheaper and it's just a better value because it'll alert you to problems, and it is a really good piece of equipment. So I would stick with this Toa gauge for sure. Yes, Leanne says it's the black Toa gauge. The black Toa gauge is the digital Toa gauge. Well, I really didn't have anything planned for today. Like I said, this was a surprise for me. So I think I'm just going to go ahead and wrap it up here. And I'm back on the 13th, and maybe we can go through some more of this stuff. Submit any questions that you want to talk about, what we can do on our next session, and we can run through it, and hopefully we'll be a little bit more prepared next time. So it was good to see everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into these lives every day, and we enjoy bringing them to you. We're at normally at 3 p.m. Central Time here in the States. So to all you Aussies and everybody in England and everybody in Canada, and of course here in the States, we'll catch you guys next time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.